All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started now. It looks like we have most of the registered attendees online now. And this session is being recorded. And so if anybody needs this for future reference, feel free to reach out to the iPro Solution Services team. You can do so by emailing solutionservices@iprotech.com. Today's feature focus is, again, on eCapture. eCapture is the high-end, high-speed processing engine as part of the iPro Enterprise products. So we're going to move right into eCapture. This session is intended for those who have used eCapture before, and we're just going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the various settings. And so if you are new to eCapture, we do have other sessions that you can attend to learn a little bit more about eCapture, and we definitely encourage you to attend those as well. But for today, we're going to focus on the various different types of job settings. And so to do that, we have to understand what types of jobs there are in eCapture. So I'm going to do a quick recap just to go over that real quick. And in eCapture, we have a few different types of jobs that can be done. So we'll start with the general workflow. Obviously, we start with our discovery job. That's the initial job that is performed in eCapture, and this is where you go ahead and point to source media and identify the files that exist in your target project. It'll do the cataloging, it'll do some limited metadata extraction, language identification, and indexing, which is optional. Beyond the discovery job, you have two paths you can go. You can move into what we call our data extract jobs. And this is the type of job you may use if you are going to be performing or preparing for native file review or for production. That's native file production. In this type of job, we'll do things such as the extended metadata extraction, and we'll also perform OCR at this point. This will also give you options for deduplication and other things that we can do through the Flex processor, which we'll touch on today as well. This other type of job is our processing jobs. In the processing jobs, it basically does the same things as you would get in a data extract job, except now you have the options for processing to TIFF or to PDF. And we'll cover this a little bit today because there's some benefits of both, but it's good to understand the differences as well. Beyond the processing job, we then move into our QC, which we're not going to cover today, but there is a feature focus scheduled for the QC system. But beyond that, we then move into export. So we will cover the export job and the various settings for export jobs today as well. So today we'll start with our discovery job, and we'll move into our data extract options, processing, and then move into the export jobs. Again, if you have any questions during the feature focus presentation today, feel free to add those to the chat session, and I will do my best to answer those as we go through the various settings. And those questions can be anything related to the actual settings or best practices and workflow recommendations. So I appreciate your time, and we'll go ahead and move into eCapture now. So with eCapture, as you know, it's structured into in the client management tree, allowing you to set up for discovery jobs, which have to happen first, and then you can move into data extract or processing jobs from that point. And so here we have some sample data that we've gone through, but the initial settings that we set up for discovery jobs, we're going to go ahead and look at those settings first. So I'm going to go ahead to the project level and just view and modify our settings. And so you'll notice across the top of our options for eCapture, we have several tabs showing right now. We're going to cover the discovery options first, and then we'll go to the data extract options, processing. We'll talk about the filtering options in our Flex processor, and then move into export jobs after that. So in the discovery options, we have several options initially to get going for your case or your project. And so initially off the top, we do have this calculate page count option, enhanced password protection detection. This is one of our newer features that's been added more recently. I think this was added in our 2013.2 release, which was middle of last year. The calculate page count option, this will do a rough estimate of the number of pages you might expect if you were to move into a processing job. This is one of those options that is used, but it's something that we recommend not using it just because it does add a lot of time to the upfront process. There are plenty of available e-discovery calculators out in the market that you could use to try and make these determinations, because these are really just estimates at this point. And so you're better off using those calculators versus spending all the time in the discovery process to use that feature. Just a recommendation on that. For the enhanced password detection, this is just another level of password detection when you're going through the initial discovery phases. We do have some baseline password flagging that we do. This enhanced password protection will dig in a little bit deeper to the various different dialogues. If you are looking for capturing those warnings and being able to report on that, it is recommended to use that. That is an efficient process. It's not something that will really slow down the process in any noticeable manner. So it's more than likely a recommended process there. As for the node handling, nodes refers to the different containers that you're going to be pointing to. So we do have the archives, treating archives as directories. This would be zip files, RAR files, various different archive containers. You can choose to treat those as a directory. And so it'll basically extract everything out, separate everything out so that each sub-item is treated as a parent document to itself. So if in an archive, maybe you had a loose email sitting there and it had its own children docs, the parent level would be identified to the email, not to the archive itself. This would also be true if you're dealing with loose files on disk that have embedded files, such as these items referenced down here, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Another newer option to eCapture that was added last year was to treat PDF portfolios or PDF packages as containers. Similar control, similar process there. Again, you can choose to treat them so that every document found within the PDF package is referenced as a parent item. And then if it has sub-pages or sub-marks for child documents, those would be treated as child documents to the individual documents. If you turn that off, the entire PDF will be treated as one overall family document. And so you'll have a number of child attachments more than likely. So most people are turning both of these options on from what I see in my experience in the field. Moving on down, we have our Lotus Notes and email deduplication handling. So Lotus Notes handling, this is something that, for years we've been improving the process in eCapture with our Lotus Notes handling. Some of the things that have changed over time, have required that we leave in place the ability for legacy handling. This is so that you can maintain hash compatibility with earlier versions. This is beneficial if you have a case that has been going on for many years and you want to maintain that hash compatibility throughout the project. Any new projects, it is highly advisable to turn this off. When you turn this off, what's happening is we're actually using a COM level for Lotus Notes to go through each of the Lotus Notes items, and it allows us to better distribute the NSF or the items within the NSF. By using legacy handling, we're actually leveraging the UI for Lotus Notes, so we're actually having to launch each individual item one at a time in the UI. And so it's a single-threaded operation. It's much slower, but again, we leave that in place just because we want to make sure we give you the ability to maintain that consistency in hash. As for email deduplication, this can sometimes be confusing. Basically what we're doing here is at this point we're using these various different values to calculate a string that we then use to determine a hash value. And so a lot of people think they have to just check every box and count it all as good. Now keep in mind that by using these various values, you should be able to find a distinct uniqueness for each document, even if you don't have every single one turned on. For example, the body of a document, unless you anticipate emails being sent with the same subject line from the same person to all the same recipients on the exact same date and time with the same number of attachments, but having a different message in the body, if you anticipate that happening, which would be pretty rare, then you can turn on the check for body. When checking for body, it's one thing you'll notice there's a remove whitespace option that turns on. Depending on the recipients and the various applications they use for receiving documents, so if I'm using Microsoft Outlook, and I've got a colleague who's using Lotus Notes. All the different header information may be the same, but the body, based on the program I'm receiving my email with, may display it with different levels of white space. There might be hard returns that calculate or show a different way in the receiving application. So it's a good idea if you're using the calculate body to also remove white space if you want to have better identification for duplicates. So again, these are all just header values. These will not change the values of what we get as far as email metadata extraction. It's not going to alter the file in any way. This is just so we can calculate a hash value. Okay. So again, if there's any questions on any of these parts, feel free to just pop those into the chat session as we go through. Now we do have the alternate email date. So you can choose which date you want to use for recognition within the checking for duplicates. The last modification date really comes into play in my experience based on files that are maybe in draft folders that have not yet been sent. You can check to see if that file's been changed, because I may have a file in my draft that, if I pulled from the network, that a colleague may have pulled the same file into their draft folders, and my last modification date may change because I might go in and modify that draft. If you use the creation date, you may not see or notice, it may be marked as a duplicate, so you may not see that different instance that has possibly been changed. Checking for BCC is also another one that can be tricky. Thinking of when I send an email, if I BCC somebody, it will show BCC recipients as part of my sent box. Now, recipient side is not going to show any of those. So if I turn that on, a sent item would not show as duplicative to a received item for a colleague. And so the BCC would actually treat, because that's visible on the sender side, it's going to treat that as a unique email compared to the received version. That may be something you desire. It may not be something. It may create more copies of documents than you choose to review. But again, that's something for you to decide on what that does. As for the date values that are calculated in the hash, it does also track not only just the date, but also to the time and seconds. It counts to the milliseconds on that. And again, that's just a value that we generate in the hash. So this is something that is pretty detailed alone without the body, in my experience. And again, you can choose what you do with that. Overall processing speeds won't change dramatically based on that, but there will be a slight slowdown if you are calculating for the body as well. Again, we're still talking about discovery options, so this is the initial cataloging of documents when we first are doing our discovery. This next section has to do with embedded objects, OLE embedded objects, inline images, things of that nature. The most common application I see, or the most common settings I see in the field, is to not extract inline images as separate attachments, but to treat embedded files as separate documents. Very rarely do I see people use the treat email inline images as attachments, because what happens is you end up with a number of different JPEG and GIF images as attachments, because people might have that in their email signature block. You look at the emails that come from iPro. We have included in our email signature blocks an image that would be treated as a separate attachment if you turn this option on in a discovery job. Moving on down to embedded files, obviously you have the option to look to these different file types to see if they have embedded objects. And so these are the different options on which ones you can be looking for. Again, most commonly I see most of these pretty much called for. Now, once you've set your settings, I mean, in eCapture, it's throughout the product, you'll find there's a lot of options. So you can always save as a system default, and you can also save client-specific settings. Right now, I'm adjusting my settings at the project level, and by doing so, any new sub-jobs that are created underneath this project will inherit the settings I'm applying here. If I go and change my settings at a specific discovery job, it won't go all the way back up and change the settings to the project level. It will just impact that specific discovery job. So you'll notice on this discovery job, we have true email inline images. We have the body marked as part of the email deduplication. So if you're changing your settings for a project, you do it there. If you want, you can also set system-wide settings, as you'll note in the bottom here. So I can say that the system default, that'll apply to all clients as your default settings. So after these initial settings, we get into indexing. This is a new tab. For those who have used eCapture for a number of years, you may have noticed that in last year's releases, we split this out into its own tab. And that's just because we've expanded some of the options in indexing. One of the best things as far as rule of thumb goes for indexing, a lot of times people want to start with a discovery job and get into reporting pretty quickly. So one thing that is advisable if you're looking for quick reports is to first start your discovery job without the search index on. You can come back to a discovery job after it's completed, and after it's done, I could jump into a discovery job and hit my modify discovery job button. So I'm on this discovery job here, it's already been completed. And if it had not already been indexed, I can check a box and it will let me create a new index for that. This one has already been indexed, so the option tells me, okay, I can delete the existing index and re-index the documents. In this instance, maybe I want to re-index and add in a check for the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean word breaks. So if I've made a mistake in my indexing, I can come back and use this. This option, if you had not indexed initially, will just show create indexes. And so one thing, if you, just matter of practice, I think it's best just to start your discovery job without the create index so that if you need reports up front. If you're not going to do any sort of reporting, you're just going to move the discovery job straight into your keyword searching and your processing, then go ahead and create that right from the get-go. Assuming the scenario of creating it right from the get-go, we'll just go through these options here. The search indexing options, these come from DT Search. So the top section here really has to do with DT Search options. And then down below are some options dealing with OCR and parent-child text handling. So the questions deal with, do you want to index numbers? Keeping in mind that if you index numbers, when you run into Excel files and stuff, every unique number is going to add an entry into your dictionary, essentially. So it can really expand your size of your index, which can lead to slower search speed. And depending on the type of case and the type of subject material, this could be a big impact or it may be a minimal impact. If you're dealing with a financial firm that's doing some sort of auditing and there's a lot of spreadsheets with numbers, this could, have a pretty big impact in your search speed as well as the indexing time as well it takes up front. The results of indexing numbers allows you to then search for specific numbers in an easier manner when you are searching, but again, the overall search speeds will be slower as a whole. Recognizing dates, emails, addresses, and credit cards. By applying this option, essentially it will look for date formats, it'll look for email addresses, it'll look for the @ symbol, the .com, .net, what have you, as one full word. So if I key in my email address, it's going to look for that as a whole. If I don't do that, it's going to look for, my first part of my email address, and then they'll have a break at the @ symbol. It'll treat that as a space, and then it'll look at the iprotect.com as another set of unique terms. So recognizing dates, email addresses, and credit cards allows the system to know that, hey, anytime we see the @ symbol with the .com or something like that, we're going to treat that as one word, so that when it's searched for, you can more likely get more accurate hits, and also you're going to be storing less information again in the database. Auto break for CJK. This has to do with Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages. It also actually covers Arabic languages, basically symbol-based languages. There are certain phrases that can change based on the language, especially in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. They use a lot of the same symbols, but based on the ordering and where the various breaks are based on the language, it will change. So when you look at the various symbol structures, to the naked eye, you won't see the spacing unless you know if you're reading in Chinese, Japanese, or Korean, you'll know where the spaces belong. And so the DB search index will work in conjunction with basis tech to identify these breaks. And so that if you key in a search phrase in your search term, it's going to know the variations in what that breakup might be represented by in the native doc. And so that's something you can turn on. If you're expecting Asian language documents, this is a good thing to turn on. Filtering to index corrupt or encrypted documents. You can use filtering basically to decide whether or not to index those documents that are coming back as corrupt or encrypted and to get any sort of text out of them. A lot of times it's just going to be text that talks about the encryption level or the corruption. So it may or may not be beneficial. It's your choice to use that. As far as binary files, this deals with files that are code-based files, executables, DLLs, INI files. So choosing whether or not to skip binary files and not bother indexing them, to index them, to filter those out, or to filter for Unicode are the options you have there. And if you look in, if you want full detailed descriptions, we do have a user guide that kind of goes in and breaks out each difference there. And so most often I see most people skip binary files unless they're dealing with an IP case, dealing with actual code. Hyphens, whether or not to treat them as spaces, to make them searchable, to ignore them altogether, or to index all three ways. So if I have a term that's a hyphenated term, if I do the ignore hyphens, it's basically going to remove that hyphen and not count it as a space, and it's not even going to search for it. So if you key in a search with the hyphen, it'll just ignore your search term that way. If you make hyphens searchable, they again become part of the search structure. If you treat them as spaces, it's going to look for the first word separate and apart from the second word. Indexing all three ways allows you to have the best of all three. And so it usually makes it easier for the end users unless you can really control your end users and how they're constructing their searches. Parent-child text handling, this has to do with how email attachments will be indexed. Most people prefer to have the child document indexed separately so that the search hits are not hitting against the email. And so this is the more common option. Some people do want to see that as part of the email search results. And that's usually if they're not using the include family options in their review application. And so you can choose which one to go with. I see most often the separate child and parent text. Then you've got your OCR options here next. The OCR options will cover basically images that can be OCR'd as necessary. You can choose to OCR PDF documents. You can set an OCR confidence level that's acceptable. Once you set that confidence level, what will happen is if a document is marked below that level, it'll be counted as an error. If it's anything above that level, it'll be counted as good enough to move forward. So it's something you can adjust. When we calculate the OCR confidence, we do it on a per page basis, and then we total the entire document together. So if I had a 9-page document and one page failed completely and got with 0%, but the remaining pages were all at 80% or above, chances are your total is going to be like a 75% or a 76, 78%, something in that range. So it'll still count the overall document as succeeding and not being something that errors out. The option to PDF, setting a PDF page character threshold. This comes into play with image-based PDF files that have textual endorsements. So sometimes you may have scanned PDFs that have had Bates numbers applied to them in a text manner. So you can set up a threshold saying basically, I'm going to give a threshold of 25 characters. If there's 25 characters or less, we're going to go ahead and count this as something that needs to be OCR'd. So it's basically factoring in room for a Bates number thing. That's really not what we're looking for. We want to see if the whole page has text. So if it's got more than 25 characters, that's fine. We won't OCR it. But if it has less than 25 characters in this scenario, then we will OCR it. We're not going to count the Bates number as text. So you have that option there. And then OCR in PowerPoint documents. This is something I would only turn on in extreme situations where I absolutely need it. If you think about the other products on the market, and if you use other products, feel free to test this out. Normally when you have images in a PowerPoint, there's no extracted text for those when you perform discovery. And we've had clients confirm with most of the other leading applications on the market. This is true. And so what happens is with the PowerPoint documents, if you want to turn this on, we will actually OCR every single page, but it will really slow down your discovery quite a bit. So this is something you can do optionally. It's advised not to use it just because of the significant slowdown in speed, but it's there for you if you need that higher level of accuracy for a particular client or case. I think the better approach personally is just to flag PowerPoints and just make sure your client knows that any images within a PowerPoint will not be OCR'd or have any sort of text extract. Now, if somebody creates a native PowerPoint that they key in terms and words, those will be indexed and grabbed as part of the full text extraction. So something to keep in mind. Last option for discovery options is the password handling. The password handling list allows you to basically load up a list of known passwords. And this will apply to, at this point, archive files only. So this will not cover if I have password protected Word docs or Excels and such. This will only be applied against container files like archives, WinRARs, zips, and so forth. So those are the discovery options. I'm going to take a moment just to pause to see if there's any questions in the chat, if anybody has any questions on that. Otherwise, we're going to move into the data extract options next. So feel free to go ahead and enter any questions you have there. I'm going to go ahead and start moving on, but I can jump back if needed. All right, so data extract options, there's been some recent changes here as well. Right now, across the top, you have the general options for replacing tabs with spaces when extracting Excel files, and then expanding pivot tables when extracting text from Excel as well. These are options that have been in place for a while, but a lot of people will turn those on just to simplify where the text is laid out in the actual extracted text. So replacing the tabs with spaces makes it a little easier to navigate through the text file, makes it a little bit smaller. And then expanding pivot tables obviously is beneficial. If you do have pivot tables in the Excel, it's ideal to bring those out so you can get all the text from there. Suppressing OCR with data extract, and you'll see this with all the options in eCapture. You can basically look at the tooltips to see what you want to do, what the different options will give you. So suppressing OCR, you can basically turn off OCR. Otherwise, by default, we're going to be going through during data extracting, extracting text, extracting metadata, and everything else. So I can choose to turn that off or basically keep that on. Now, if I keep it on, again, that OCR PowerPoint options comes up. Again, that's an option. And then you also have that PDF page character threshold. More often than not, I see settings similar to this. And again, this range will vary depending on the length of the expected base numbers. Now, the newer option towards the bottom, this actually has a significant speed improvement for Lotus Notes handling. So if you are dealing with Lotus Notes files, we have created some new methods. Doesn't really impact the quality to a great degree, but it will slightly. Some of the things that may impact basically like the spacing of the header, where the from line and the to line and so forth. In the native Lotus Notes UI, the spacing on that will shift a little bit more. With the extraction using the medium speed balanced approach, that is somewhat new. This will go through and run the data extract, and there'll be some slight variances, but we'll still get all the text. It's just the layout of where everything sits might be slightly different. So it's something, if you have Lotus Notes jobs or clients, run a few tests and check it out for yourself. But we are seeing most people moving to the medium speed balanced approach there for data extract. Again, you do have the option to save the system defaults. And again, these will also be impacted at the project or specific job level. So if there's any questions on that, feel free to chime in with those. We're going to move into processing options. And there's a number of different tabs underneath processing options. This has to deal with tipping and PDFing. And there are two things that we're going to cover in the filtering the Flex processor that are pretty significant that most people haven't realized yet as far as choosing whether or not to go to TIFF or PDF during this phase and what the impact is. So we'll start with the general options, then we'll move into the filtering and talk about that. All right, so obviously you'll see at the top the OCR page is missing text. This option will basically allow you to do as it says, is basically if you have any pages within a document missing text, we'll OCR those. You do have to, again, the PDF page character threshold, which we explained before, and your confidence levels. The remove blank pages option here, this actually has to do with this section here. Everybody usually questions what this number represents. This actually represents the dots on the page, the DPI essentially. So if we find a section of the document that is blank enough where there's no values, we'll set the threshold so that it'll look for this number here. The default is 50. This generally tends to be a good rule. I haven't seen many people change that. So, if you want to remove blank pages, let's say from an Excel file that might span multiple pages, or could have a number of gaps, this is definitely a good thing to turn on if your client is, still TIFFing Excel files. Most people nowadays are agreeing between the different parties to just share native Excels, and basically to placeholder those or TIFF only those that have been redacted. And so we're not seeing this as much. Option here to process CSV files with Microsoft Excel. Otherwise, it'll be used like a text editor. You can, as you may know, you can launch a CSV file with, with Notepad. You can launch it with TextPad or UltraEdit, and it'll basically just show a comma separated values type text file. Launching into Excel, obviously, we'll use the fielded approach there with the columns and rows. And so some people prefer for TIFFing purposes to use the Excel formatting for that. It's a little cleaner and probably easier to follow in Excel. Processing HTML files with Internet Explorer, this generally tends to be the preferred model because it'll look more like it's expected to display versus if you turn that off, it's going to use essentially a text editor type layout, again, which is similar to the CSV to Excel type structure where it's just going to show all the native HTML code versus the displayed intent. Down below here, we have Lotus Notes options. Again, you can use the Lotus Notes handling. If you print from Lotus Notes UI, you can get a very, very accurate representation of what it would look like to anybody viewing in Lotus Notes. However, it's much slower, and it is single-threaded. And so it's a much slower process. It's one of those things that I personally would, if a client's on the fence about it, I would produce to them a sample, one using Legacy and one without. I would encourage them to go without for speed purposes, but let them know that here's the difference in what you might expect. The difference will be that we're essentially creating a form structure to what would be represented in the Lotus Notes UI. It's not always going to be 100% accurate as far as layout, but the general content's always going to be there. So it is recommended to turn off the legacy handling unless the client absolutely demands it. Moving on down from there, we do have email cutoff handling options. This has to do with sometimes text will cut off to the sides of the different emails. And so you have a number of different options here that you can actually change the order of as well. One of the more recent ones we added was basically this attempt in text. This is kind of like the last ditch effort to make sure you get all the content of the email. So the first step we typically go with is the attempt in landscape. So we basically just take the image and rotate it, try it in landscapes, hopefully it'll fit. If it doesn't, we'll again try with shrink to fit in portrait. I can turn on and off the various options. I can attempt with RTF. We've seen some success with that. And if you've got those TIFFs or those emails that just won't get all the text in the image, you can attempt in text mode. Now this is basically just going to be a flat text, plain text type view. You'll lose some of the formatting and such, but at the end of the day, you're going to have all the content, which is typically most important. You can then set your preferred order for how to handle those. Maybe you want to try the attempt in RTF last. The absolute default last is always this assign text cutoff flag and managing QC. This will require you to do some manual retiffing from QC if you're still not happy with the results based on these. If you don't want to try one of them, then you're limiting your options, and you may spend more time in QC trying to get those just right. Similar options are available here for Lotus Notes, but we don't have the attempt in portrait shrink to fit option. It's just based on the Lotus Notes code, and we don't have the attempt in RTF. So you can try the attempt in landscape, text, and then again move into QC for further handling if neither of the first two can handle that. As far as general depth color depth, sorry, this basically applies to anything that is not Excel, Word, or PowerPoint. So general rule, do I want to TIFF to black and white, grayscale, true color, or 256 color? The fastest process obviously is black and white, and it's also going to create the smallest files as far as file size. Next down is the image color depth. So if I'm dealing with image files, do I want to go ahead and, again, keep it at black and white, or do I want to do a bit of grayscale, knowing that images are usually going to have a little bit more depth? We might want a little bit more to those. So again, based on your client's preference and based on how much time you have to process data, these are some things you might want to change. PDF color depth, you can do as is. You can go with black and white, grayscale again. And with PDFs, obviously, you may get images, you may get text, you can get any combination of which. So if you go with the as is, it'll just check the image quality or the PDF quality, and it'll just stick with that. Again, you have an as is option for image color depth, the feature we just looked at just before, or the option, sorry. As for paper sizing, you can basically elect to utilize different paper sizing. When you're going into digital databases and review and such, it's probably okay to stick with the as is, but it's not terribly uncommon for people to demand everything be scaled down to 8.5 by 11. If you're dealing with a case that covers international data collection, you may be better off sticking with the as is, because you're probably going to find a lot of A4 and legal size and letter kind of mixed in throughout. But again, this will be based on what your client preference may be. Then general paper size applies to everything else. If it's not a PDF, what type of paper size do you want to go with? Most people move to 8.5 by 11. It's most common. So again, if there's any questions on the general options, feel free to add those to chat. So far, there are none, so I'm just going to keep rolling on through. Again, also note that we are recording this session, so if you feel like you need to come back and review any one thing, we can jump back to that for you through the video. So moving to Excel options, we do have a number of Excel options. It's a good idea to get familiar with these, figure out what's best. Rather than inundating your clients or your users with a ton of different options like you see here, it's best to figure out what you feel based on your client experience and their needs, figure out what the baseline should be, and then maybe give them a few variable options from there. Just some general feedback, you do what you feel is best. But in the Excel, if I go with the default options that come with eCapture, we don't include the headers in the actual image. Again, this is all for processing to image. We do not include the footers, but we do reveal hidden columns, hidden rows. We unhide worksheets. We unhide very hidden worksheets. Somebody asked me about this the other day. Like, what's a very hidden worksheet? That has to do with VB scripting, I think it is, where basically behind the scenes you can actually hide worksheets not using the general user interface in Excel. In Excel, I could right-click on a whole worksheet and just say hide. Using some scripting, I can do some other things to actually hide things so it wouldn't come back with the general user controls. So this is an option for that. You have the ability to auto-fit columns. So this is basically just snapping a column to full width if you need to see all the text within a column. This is something that can really add a lot of pages if you are TIFFing Excel. So it's something to be careful of. You may not always want to auto-fit columns for the view. And again, most people nowadays are reviewing native with Excel just because of all these different options that are out there and what type of problems it can create for TIFFing. And so it's definitely not a perfect science. Auto-fitting rows, basically same logic there. The option to wrap text. I think wrapping text is probably better than trying to auto-fit columns. Usually this ends up with, it's harder to read when you auto-fit a column because sometimes the column will expand more than the length of a screen. Printing with grid lines, I think that's ideal because it's easier to read on the image with the grid lines there. Unhiding windows, applying auto filters. So setting and applying those auto filters. Filters are, rules you can set up in Excel to filter out the content. It's best to have that off if you want to show everything. So no fill color. And so basically you can go and make sure that there's no color layers in the different columns. Sometimes people will use the different colors. And so it may be something you want to keep or maybe something you want to suppress for your viewing audience. Again, natives are, I think, best option with Excel, but you do have a number of options you are going to TIFF. Clearing a print area. So sometimes with Excel, I can pre-save a predefined print area. We can clear that so that it will grab everything that's available versus just the predefined print area that the user created when they set that. Same with the title columns. We can clear print on the title columns. We can clear print on the title rows. We can choose to display headings, and then expanding pivot tables is another option there. You may have multiple pivot tables in an Excel sheet. You do have, as far as comments on the Excel, choose to add those to the end of the sheet, choose to exclude them, or just display them where they belong on the sheet. Sometimes by displaying on the sheet where it belongs, it can really be hard to follow. Usually people are doing this. I see most often at the end of the sheet used as an application. Color depth options, again, for Excel, as well as paper size. And then we move into ordering and orientation. I see most often the over then down approach, but again, something you may want to cover with your client. And then landscape is most common as well. You can do as-is scaling, or you can do some adjustments to fit it to various sizes to make sure it'll fit. And you can also fit to page and width. This is something that was added more recently. So if you wanted to fit it on a 1x1, which could be really hard to read if you get it too small, or you can just do some adjustments. And these are all options that are commonly found in Excel itself. We have some date field handling options where you can replace the date values with the date last saved. You can replace it with the date created. You can replace it with comments. You can replace it with a field code. So that'd be kind of the function behind the scenes. Choose to do not replace or remove it altogether. You have a number of different options there. And then the header and footer information, you can replace with file path. You can replace with the file name. So basically have no path whatsoever, just the file name by itself. Versus comments, the code, or you can choose to remove. You also have some centering options on the image. Blank page removal. On the blank page removal options, you can choose to do that based on both the page order options. So that's based on this. So if it sees something that like an entire row all the way across is empty for the full width, for the height of a page, then it would remove everything. If you could do it, you could also do it based on selected page order. And so you have the different options there. So doing based on both page orders, it's going to look both across and down to make sure there's nothing anywhere in that grid. And it would remove that. If you do it based on this, you're more likely going to remove more pages based on the second option, but it might be harder to piece the puzzle together if you're looking at the images. You can also choose to generate a metadata summary sheet for images in line for the images with the Excel. That'll have the document properties, comments, formulas, and link content. Word options are not as many. Excel has the most, but some of them are, show hidden text. So I can unhide hidden text. Showing revisions. I can choose to show basically what was the last saved instance. I can show the detailed revisions copy. I can show a final copy, which will hide the revisions, or I can show both copies. So one that would show basically the final output, but also another copy that would show with all the different revisions. Orientation, again, you can set it as is, or you can use force everything to portrait or landscape. And you can also scale to the page size. Color depth, page size, paper size, and then the field handling, whether or not to replace with comments, code, date created and such, or to remove. And same thing with file name, whether or not to include the path with comments, with code, or not replace at all. Again, another option for generating metadata summary slip sheet. Moving to PowerPoint, we can basically just use all the settings that's found in the PowerPoint itself, and then choose to add the hidden slides, comments, frames, and then what format. Or we can set our various settings here. This note pages split was added to meet the DOJ requirements. A lot of times they require Basically, each slide has its own image, and then any notes pages to be on a separate page following. And so this is something that's not available directly in PowerPoint. This is something we had to custom code in eCapture to handle this. But you can just print, all the other options are what you would find in the normal print options in PowerPoint. Again, you have some slide size options as well as paper size options, color depth options, page orientation, slide orientation. Again, very similar to what you saw with the options in Word. We also have an option here for header and footers. So I can choose to include the date and time, and I can use to update automatically. So it'll go based on date last saved, or I can do it on date created. I can choose the format structure, or I can leave it as it was saved, or I can set a fixed value. I can also add the footer as is, or I can add a footer of my own. Okay. And then as far as slide numbering, I can do it. I can show it or not show it. Sometimes it's forced on based on a code that a client can put in the PowerPoint. So you can turn that off, and we know how to turn that off behind the scenes. It's not easy to do through the UI itself. But that's something you can force off if you want to through these options here. Then you have the notes and handouts pages, and basically the same options for those. So that covers all the processing options. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions with eCapture and its tiffing is the concept between PDFing and tiffing. So we're going to jump over into the Manage Flex Processor rules and talk about our image all rule. With the imaging rule, let me move into an actual processing job, sorry. Cancel this, and let's go to a processing job. Let me just create a new processing job here. Okay, we're going to grab this case here. All right, and we're going to move right into the filtering options. And we want to talk about our image all rule. So one of the misconceptions out there is that if I convert to PDF instead of imaging, that basically I can't get out TIFFs like I need to. A lot of people see this option here, this action to convert to PDF, and they assume that means basically I'm going to PDF now and I can't go back. That is a misconception. When you're creating the images or the static representations of the native files, you have two options. You have the image option, which uses black ice controllers, and it creates a TIFF image. You also have the ability to convert to PDF, and this will create a text-based PDF representation of your file. So I can move from a Word document into a TIFF using image, or I can move it to a text-based PDF. The actual conversion to text-based PDF is 3 to 4 times faster than creating a TIFF. So it's one of the things where right now we set our default to image, and that's because we've had eCapture on the market for 8 or 9 years now, and it's basically the standard. We don't want to change and force your human to change settings, but this is definitely something you should consider looking at and potentially making changes to in your internal workflow if you want to see a speed increase in the overall process. Even if I convert to PDF at this point, it's going to, again, save a text-based PDF, so it's a smaller file on disk. It's faster to convert than going straight to TIFF. And then at export time, I still have the option to generate TIFFs. So I'm not limiting my final output. I'm actually just changing the process phase to use PDF print drivers versus the TIFF or black ice drivers. So this is something I would highly recommend everybody on the call at least take a look at to see if they can improve their overall processes. And so that's the one thing I want to talk about with the Flex processor. I'm not going to dive too much into the Flex processor today. This should be its own feature focus, and it is. There's a lot you can do here, but the one thing to consider when processing jobs is to convert to PDF versus imaging. You also have placeholdering rules and various different options you have. But most often you start with an imaging or image all. I recommend the convert to PDF option. So give it a try. Give us your feedback. We've had this in place now for over 2 years. It's been well proven by a number of different clients, and I've gotten consistent feedback that it is definitely 3 to 4 times faster than going to TIFF. And that even includes the conversion time at export to then convert the PDF to TIFF. So definitely well worth the invested time. All right. I'll close that. And so we've talked about processing jobs, we've talked about data extract, we've talked about discovery. Last thing to talk about is our export job settings. And so with exports, I'm going to start just by using a processing export because it really will cover everything that we would normally get with data extract. The only difference is with data extract, you don't have TIFF options. So we'll just cover this here. I'm going to launch a series just to go through the options, but hopefully you know that you can create an actual export series. What this does is establishes your baseline settings, and then for a given project, every new export underneath will track your image numbers, track your settings and everything else, so it's a lot easier to maintain that way. As far as the options at export time, I can do a direct-to-disk export, which has been the traditional method of pushing data out of eCapture. And so I can push files out to disk with load files, I can push the emails out, the natives, the extracted text into text files, and so on from there. We also have the direct to Eclipse option, where you can push to the Eclipse review application in an automated fashion, rather than dumping it out to disk and then having to do a specific import in Eclipse. We also have that option for relativity. All right, and then as you'll see, you can also load export settings from a template. So if I have a template file on disk, I could load that up. This is beneficial if you're working with a outside service provider and you want to, have them use your settings. Maybe you've got a case that's grown too big for internal purposes. You can basically send them your export settings so they use the same controls and the same options without you having to give them line-by-line details of every different option out there. At export time, I do have the option to choose multiple different load file formats. You'll see here, I'm just going to choose a few select ones right now. And then down below, whether or not I process to JPEG, TIFF or PDF, I still have all the same image format options. So even if I convert to PDF first, I can still export to TIFF, whether it be multi-page TIFF or single-page TIFF, or I can put out to PDF, multi-page PDF, and then one of our newer options, this multiple-page PDF files per family. This will basically create for every email and attachment a single PDF that will have everything together as one. If I choose the PDF options for multi-page or single-page PDFs, I do have the option to create a searchable PDF here. I can also make the endorsements themselves searchable, so they'd be textual-based endorsements, or I can stamp those on in an image format so they're not searchable in the PDF file itself. If you're going to be hosting for review, it's ideal to convert those PDFs to fast web-enabled PDFs. What this does is if you have a 30-page or 100-page PDF, rather than waiting for the entire PDF document to come back in an online review scenario, it'll actually start loading one page at a time. So that way, as an end user, once I log in to look at the view, I instantly start seeing page 1 and page 2, and they basically just start becoming available as they roll up. Versus if I have a 500-page PDF, I don't have to wait the entire time for the entire PDF to come out before I can start navigating through some of the pages. So this is an ideal option to turn on if you will be using PDFs. Converting a TIFF obviously grays out those options, and you have to convert LCW to images to JTIFF. We also have some force canvas options. What this does is allows you to take those items that have scaled larger than expected or maybe smaller than expected and force them onto a canvas size of 8.5 by 11. So I can force all my larger images down to 8.5 by 11. That way I make sure the scale and the size in the review doesn't change as I navigate from document to document. You can apply this to select files only, so maybe I just want to apply this to my CAD files and bring those all down to a certain size. And you have some centering options for that as well. Exporting text files, you have a number of different options here for including the image key in the document text. As you'll note here from the tooltip, I do have a few different options here that I can apply. And so I can come in and I can add a page token if I want to add page numbering in here, just by adding a bracket P in here. So just go bracket P. And you can see from the tooltip the different options you do have in here. Okay. You can choose to create text placeholders for missing text files. and whether or not your document text is single file or page level text. Most commonly, you have document text as a single file, and this is generally an option used quite a bit as well. Exporting native files, I can export native files across the board, or I can do select native files only. If I'm just going to export my Excels or spreadsheet type documents, choose that, or I can choose by specific file types over here. So a number of different options as far as what to produce natively. Expand those out from there as well. We also have some conversion options for email. So maybe for Outlook, I want to export those as an MHT format or rich text format or HTML. I can do that. Maybe for Lotus Notes, I want RTF. You also have file extension options. So sometimes native files are saved without their actual extension. So I might have a Word document that has no extension. It's just been saved as a file name, and somebody, for some reason, removed the extension. You can choose to add the extension only if it's missing. You can also append a corrected extension. So this would be in instances where I have, let's say, a Word document saved as a .jpeg. I could then output basically be file.jpeg.doc. So it would put the correct extension after the challenge, showing you that, hey, somebody had saved this incorrectly. Maybe maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe it was an accident. But you can show that based on your file settings. That will be applied at export time. Or you can choose to just straight up replace the incorrect extension. So instead of file.jpeg.doc, it just be file.doc. All right, so with that, as far as metadata settings, there's a lot of different options you can use here. It's highly advisable to come up with your standard and save it as a field list. As you'll note from this list here, these are all my available export metadata fields. I've got different system fields that are captured by the system as we go through. This is like parent attachment, custodian names, things of that nature. I have metadata fields that are captured. Metadata is pulled from the documents themselves. I also have flags that are applied to documents during the discovery and processing phases. And then we have external metadata. So if I've got data that I've pushed into eCapture from various platforms, maybe from Allegro, could be from other ECA tools, you can include that external metadata so you can basically have a blended export from eCapture that covers the metadata from both products. You'll notice iPro has ships with 3 standard, actually I think we have the 4 standard field lists that are included now, where we have our basic, our standard field list, our extended, and our enterprise field list. And so you can pull through and just grab one of these predefined field lists, and you'll see that it'll just auto-populate the select fields. You can tell by the field type names over here what type they are, and one type that takes a lot of user work is the group fields. So I can create group fields for maybe a sort date, and so I can go ahead and edit to see what this is. I basically have a sort date where I'm looking for sent date or last modified. So this will cover all file types, essentially. And then if there is no sent date, it's probably loose stock, so I'll then look at last modified date. I've also added this sort field indicator. So in any metadata type field, you'll have an option to make a sort field. What that does, if you look at the tooltip up here to set a sort field, this will apply the value from the parent to all child documents. So if I have a date field to an email, I can apply that to all the sub-attachments as well if I choose to. Or maybe there's a value of custodian or author or something like that. You can apply that across all the child documents to keep that uniform. With your field list, once you have those set, you can save those out as your own unique templates, and you can save them at a client level. You can save them system-wide, or you can save an INI file if you want to share with an outside service provider or another co-counsel or opposing counsel. So you can save those out as a file on disk and share that with them as well. As far as field options, you can do the populate child fields for parent documents. So basically any fields that are blank on the child side, you can basically populate from the parent values. We also have the include field names in the first line of the file. So in the output load file, you want basically a header line that shows what the different metadata fields are. And then we also have this export OCR text field. This is for concordance type exports. If you want to have in the load file the actual OCR text field, you can do that as well. We have a number of date range options. I know we're moving past the extended hour that we had planned for. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up though. We do have a number of options for allowing you to convert date fields to the preferred format. You can choose not to convert them. You also have the ability to resolve the time down to seconds precision. Legacy date formatting will basically just apply to anything that was eCapture 5.5 and before. If I turn that off, I can then extend my options to basically say, you know, anything outside of a certain date range, I'm going to treat these as invalid dates. So I can say, you know, my start date and end date. Maybe I want to make my start date, you know, something a little bit more realistic. I can choose to make this, you know, the 1900s. So this is something you can go through and modify. Let's go with 1980 there. So let's say anything that's marked as early as 1980, we're going to treat that as invalid. And then for invalid dates, I can choose to not convert, or I can put in a field output value. If I leave this this line item blank, it'll invalidate field output value will be blank. So you basically have a blank entry there. And you can choose what field metadata types to apply that to down in the list below. Okay. Last options for going through export have to do with basically your endorsements. You can do any number of different endorsements. You can do 3 different endorsements, per region here below. So I can maybe grab my image key over here, and then from here, maybe I want to add a custom user-defined field, and I can insert custom text. So I can insert that. So I've got that there, and you can change the font at each region, or you can keep them. By default, I think they're all set to a, I think it's a 10-point or 12-point font. No, so this one here is set to 14. Might have been changed in my system settings. But anyways, you can change your different font size, the different font type, and again, you can stack up to 3 different values per region. So maybe we want to add a barcode to this section as well. Add that as well. And then getting into, after endorsing, I can get into the various different formats for output. I can choose a volume max data size. If I set this to 0, it'll just make it any size you want. It'll just keep growing. It won't make multiple volumes. You can choose to increment the output every X number of files. I can choose to rename my folders as images, and then do a preview and see what the structure looks like. And if I'm not happy with the structure, I can come back in and change this. And maybe instead of having everything marked as like images 001, I want to change this to subfolders. So now it's images and then a subfolder of 001 and then a numbering here. You notice the natives are showing an OF underscore. So I'm going to change that directory for each native. And we'll just call these natives now. You'll see a native 001, so it'll match the images and text structure there. Moving on down, I can choose to create load file only at export time. So if I just want to create a load file and not actually output anything, I can do that. OCR LFP document text options, I can do the OI line or the OT line for file references in the LFP. Export path, I can change the export path with the following drive letter so that it basically is set up in the load file for me in advance. I can do some image key numberings that are basically I can create those on the fly. And you can see the separators here that I can define. And so maybe I want to do the doc level as well. Or I can do predefined numbering based on a file name. That's during discovery, or data extract options. If I've already data extracted this, done a native file extraction and put it into review, and now I'm coming back and tipping select files, I can use the previously used numbering from a data extract export, so that we maintain consistency there if you'd like. And so it'll give you a sample image key down below, and then I can set my encoding options, and also if I go to force ANSI, I can set a different character replacement there. And that's pretty much it. So, today we've covered the options for discovery, for processing jobs, for data extract, and for export jobs. Again, always keep in mind with eCapture, there are a number of different options. You can save templates, save your preferred workflow, so you don't have to continually change and go through all these settings every time. With discovery jobs, as we talked about earlier, I can go in and modify a discovery job after the fact to re-index. There are some additional options that you can get on later. And obviously there are system options for setting up how your workers interact and many different things. So we encourage you to visit our website and sign up for additional future focus sessions. Appreciate everybody's time and patience today. I know we went a few minutes over the hour. And again, this session is recorded, so if you need a copy of the recorded session, be sure to shoot us an email at solutionservices@iprotech.com and send in a request for that, and we'll get that over to you. So appreciate everybody's time today, and look forward to working and seeing you all, and hopefully we'll see you all at our user conference, which is coming up in May. So be sure to visit our website and check out the iPro Innovations Conference for times and location information. And if you do join us, we'll have a number of great hands-on labs, and we'd love to hear your feedback as well. So I encourage you to come join us if you can. Again, thank you everybody for your time, and have a great day.